So saw the news, I guess, over the last day or two. I guess Quaker, if I think it's the Quaker company, they've decided to change their famous syrup, Aunt Jemima. They're going to change the name or get rid of the name. And I see people, kind of showing it, saying, "Hey, this is happening." Then I've seen people who have literally been tripping, saying, "This is what are we coming to?" That changing the name of a syrup is something major now, and so people seem to be, again, I'm just watching. I hadn't planned to talk about it, but I just see people falling on kind of both sides. I don't know if that necessarily people are celebrating it, but I definitely see, in a sense, those who are saying this is going too far, and I understand both sides of it. To be honest with you, I really do understand both sides of it. But here's the perspective that I wanted to share, and again, give these youth, these millennials, the props that they deserve. Because while we're in our age group, while we're kind of deciding whether we agree or disagree with something, the entire time I think we're really missing the influence that the millennials are having, that I think I could that our generation maybe missed on, or whatever. Again, this is just a perspective. But in reference to the Aunt Jemima thing, from what I understand, again, this is the Quaker company themselves deciding they're going to change their name because they're admitting, yeah, they're admitting that their original name kind of came from a racist history, or maybe even someone who had been a slave. If I, from what I understand, I didn't dig too deep into it, and so for the name change, for those who are just kind of, I saw some other African Americans just really opposed to, like, man, I can't believe it's coming to this, and it was not so much that they were upholding it, or that they didn't necessarily want the name to change. They just thought it was. I think their complaint is that. In a sense, political correctness has gotten to the point where things that, in their mind, I would say partly don't matter, are now being pushed to the forefront, and it's coming some level of symbolism. And so, again, I can see some of that perspective, but ultimately, what I see, and I think most would agree, that here's a company who's kind of decided it's not socially expedient to, keep still representing something that has, in a sense, such a history. So in a sense, the company's making this choice on their own, not from pressure from these youth or any group. It didn't come from black people all of a sudden deciding we're gonna boycott Aunt Jemima, and the decision would be, is being made because of it. I would say, in the event that that had happened and that was the reason they would change, I would actually find that somewhat silly. But for the company to kind of decide, hey, it's not socially expedient for us to keep having these replicas of the past that kind of reference the racist history, we don't see that as smart. That's really just an abode to capitalism. They're just being smart, and to a certain extent trying to possibly protect their bottom line in the future. And it's not about whether I agree with it. I'm just providing the perspective that if the company is deciding it on their own, and a lot of companies are probably going to follow suit, if they're deciding it on their own and not from any sense direct pressure from from the African American community to do so. Again, keep in mind, one, they're protecting their bottom line, so it makes sense from a bottom line perspective, and ultimately, while it is in a sense just symbolism, because that's what I'm hearing people say, well, what does it really mean? They're not going to change their ways, and like that's a lot of people from our generation are saying that. Well, it is an to the hills that they're the way they're acting right now, in this, in a sense, tipping point, if you will, if we're considering that we don't know what this groundswell of social issues being to the forefront. We're gonna, that's kind of yet to be seen what, in a sense, comes out of it. But if this is some type of tipping point, then there's a possibility that the tipping point will mean that the future generations will grow up without symbols, for example, that represent this country's racist past. And the difference now is we've grown up in a world where America has conveniently treated our historical past of enslavement with amnesia intentionally, in a sense, to not deal with it. And so, for those who say, even the tearing down of these statues, some people say, some people from my generation will say, well, what does that actually mean? Well, the very reason that it went up is the very reason that it coming down means something. Like if the symbol, if these certain things, speaking specifically to this country, if we have these in a sense these Civil War symbols that were necessary to go up to even the South who quote unquote lost the war, if you will. So if they found the need to put the symbol up, there was a reason to put it up, then it coming down means something to that degree. Now, if you're going to equate it to is the mindset changing just because a symbol comes down, you could be correct in that idea, but does not act like the symbol meant nothing. Because if the symbol meant nothing, then they would have found no need to put it up. So a credit to look at the world we live in. The world we live in, like we're already used to the fact that the youth are tearing these damn things down. Like just running in the cities, having a protest, and next thing you know, having on a protest sometimes just to tear a damn monument down. Like we already gotten used to the fact that they're doing it. Like it seemed crazy at first, but they've been doing it all over the country. And there's a whole bunch of them that, in a sense, could or might should come down. I'm not expressing my personal feelings on whether they should or not. I'm just talking about giving respect to the fact that the millennials, within a week, 2 weeks' time, the world literally sits around and watches them tear down a monument. Like in the past, we grew up in a world in which just just doing something to the monument, painting the monument or whatever, would be seen as, why is that even necessary? Like, what I'm just saying, if in a whim that somebody wanted to just put paint on a Civil War monument, right? Like that would actually be seen as a bad thing because it is illegal. Like it's illegal to um um what's the word I'm looking for? To mess up. It's not the word I'm looking for, but to mess up historical things. Like that's illegal in the books. But right now, these millennials are acting in the way like fuck the laws, we tearing this thing down, and ain't nobody doing nothing in most cases. And so again, a credit to their spirit, their mindset in reference to the world they're choosing to live in. Now, when it comes back to the political correctness of it all, definitely still not a fan of political correctness. Is why we can't get, if you will, honest news. Political correctness really affects our ability to speak the truth. So in me giving them big ups, I'm just talking about different perspectives. So I'm not really here to discuss which side I'm on, but I am here to bring out the fact that the world that the millennials are creating, whereas we're sometimes in our generation saying that symbolic stuff will not make a difference. Well, understand that same symbolic stuff is the reason why our community, in a sense, has for a long time struggled with our sense of self. With our sense of self, because we've been exposed to imagery and things in this country for so long that it's an effort on our part, in a sense, to find ourselves and find our place. And so for the millennials to take advantage of this groundswell to the extent that major companies themselves are saying, you know what, it may not be socially expedient to keep representing these racist tropes from the past, even with, for example, Aunt Jemima over the years, quote unquote, had cleaned the imagery up. If you go back to the original image of it to where we're at now, in a sense, I saw people saying it doesn't even look, in a sense, racist anymore, which I won't disagree with that. But the fact that the company decided to do it on themselves, and I see some people saying, I can't believe it's coming to this. It didn't. The company didn't get there because even the youth said, "No, let's quote unquote boycott Aunt Your Mama." I mean, if you've seen any of my past videos, I'm not a fan of national boycotts from our community because they're not effective at 13%. Local boycotts, they're still effective. National boycotts, not so. Whole nother subject. I'll leave it alone. But I bring it up to say that's not why Aunt Your Mama, and I'm pretty sure some of these other companies will start following suit. And we're already seeing these different initiatives of wanting to have these dialogues. And I just, again, continue to see people from our generation saying these things are not going to make a difference. Or I had one brother say something that, hey, white people are tricky or whatever. Well, like I said, Quaker deciding to change Aunt Your Mama is not simply for the social benefit. It's to protect their bottom line. That's capitalism. Like capitalism can work sometimes in your favor to finally get rid of this stuff. Now, let me give what I say about. I forgot. I went on that for so long. I really want to get this out there. Thank y'all for who are still tuned in. But this sister, let me tell you again. I want to give props to these millennials. This sister named Kennedy Mitchell. When y'all say this stuff doesn't make a difference, let me show you how these millennials are moving. They're tired of us telling them this is not the right way. And let me show you how they move. You know, Dave Chappelle gave the millennial props. I love that line when he says, I'm fine sitting in the back seat letting y'all drive. Well, this is how the millennials are moving. Not only are they being allowed to tear down statues, which are legally against the law, but Kennedy Mitchell, this 22-year-old sister, she actually approached Webster's dictionary about their definition of racism. I can't tell you in the past when I used to take part in more conversations with diverse conversations, and now I focus on our community so much I don't do these dialogues too often, but I can't tell you how many times in the past when having a discussion about race where I've had some white person say, well, here's the definition of race, because they would go against the definition, for example, that Dr. George DeGruy put out there where racism is, in a sense, a system tied to the ability to control where one works, educates, or lives. So it had the power dynamic in it. The Webster Dictionary that's been there for a lot of years has only talked about the superiority of race. That's been the definition. Well, a young Kennedy Mitchell, age 22, these millennials are awesome. I think 22 is still a millennial. Literally approached Webster about the definition, and she provided her definition that included the power dynamic. How about Webster responded, kept the first definition, which only speaks to the superiority of an individual of racism, but added two more definitions in context of what she sent them. Now, they conveniently left out the word power, but the definition encompassed the additional definitions include the political power of racism and some other aspect. That's how these millennials moving. So I give that my personal example of how many times people have used, and then what I used to always say when I would be in these, I was in these diverse groups having these conversations, when somebody would pull out that Webster dictionary, again, getting into the systemic stuff, which is now the buzzword that these millennials have brought to the forefront. This country did not ever want to talk systemic stuff. It was easy to reduce racism down to an individual act because everybody could say, oh, that's wrong. And so for somebody who says, well, I don't do those things, I'm not a racist. So it was easy, in a sense, to hide from the systemic stuff because we never wanted to discuss it. So these youth, because of how they're moving, now the buzzword is systemic racism. And now, I'm not going to be surprised that systemic racism will find another version to coexist in America. Like that may happen for those who are saying, oh, it doesn't mean nothing. But to the youth credit, when the light is finally shined on something, it can't stay the same. So a credit to them. But back to this definition again, big shout out to 22-year-old Kennedy Mitchell for challenging Webster's definition of racism, and they responded and added two more definitions because this 22-year-old said, hey, this ain't the definition. This ain't the same. Now, Money to African Americans, I've been saying that ain't the definition, but let me break this down. When I've been in these diverse groups and somebody gives the specific definition that only alluded to thinking another race is superiority, just the individual, none of the ism being Latin for system or methodology, they would leave out that part. I was like, hey, so we would break down the root word. It ain't just race, it's racism. So we would break down to somebody who says, well, the definition says this. What are you talking about, Montoya? And so not only will we give the power dynamic and explain, here's this definition, now that white person will come back and be like, oh, that's just a definition, you make it up. Again, they're trying to be willfully ignorant in those situations. But what I would also say for somebody who was sincere in trying to understand the definition, I would explain, I was like, keep in mind, the systemic stuff also means which definition gets put in the dictionary, because who's in control of these dictionaries. Like there would be two above their head, but it's no difference than when we talk about history being his story. You can only, quite often, sometimes what we will call whitewashed in history is literally not so much intentional, it's that person's perspective. If I come across the water and I've been told these are savages, I write down savages not because I'm trying to make them savages, that's just what I've learned them to be. And so history, typically you need to see history from, as they say, the conquerors and the conquered side. Those versions will give you more of a reality than the perspective of someone who literally is just writing in their perspective. So history is someone's story from their perspective. Again, just giving perspectives on things. And so same thing with a dictionary. So we easily relied on a dictionary quite often. There have been plenty of times where the dictionary is not considering a young Kennedy Mitchell's things we've known for years. Dr. George Groove gave us definitions, different definitions that included the power dynamic, and they literally was always left out. It was no surprise that it was left out under a system of systematic racism. Why would I put that in the definition? But these millennials are saying, fuck that. They pushing the envelope anyway. We would only, again, I'm not blaming us. It's just I just want our generation. I'm in my 40s, 46 to be exact, to recognize and give some credit to how these millennials are moving. And if we're saying at the end of the day these things are not going to lead to systemic change, well, it don't help if we don't believe it. Like we got to take their hope and their belief along with our knowledge and the things that we understand. And when we say, in a sense, they can be tricky, well, let's give our knowledge and ensure that we help see it through. Like, let's team up instead of ridicule. Let's team up instead of criticize. Because these youth, again, and I mean, I think Hugh P. Newton said it. The revolution will be left to the young because they got the spirit. And if we so-called have the wisdom, then the only way we're going to offer it for them to listen is not to be so critical. Like, applaud what they're doing so that we can bridge the gap. There has been a long time gap. Even our hip hop generation, there was a gap on I always call it the oil being passed down to fill the lamp. Like, there was a gap from my generation to not my parents, but the generation before. There was a huge gap on the knowledge base. What I always, to even give context to that, what I always say was, as my parents and my grandparents more so, as the civil rights movement kind of took place in their lifetime, right? As it took place in their lifetime, and these quote unquote opportunities of as integration came about, right? It's not about whether we listen to what I'm saying. Don't get into whether you agree with integration or not. I'm talking about the psychology of why I think there's a gap, a huge gap in our knowledge base, and why it affects how we see each generation. Again, so whether you agree with integration or not, hear me through real quick. I'm just giving a little context and I gotta go. So the gap, in my opinion, came as that generation started to experience integration and these various things that they had never gotten in their own life. They, especially in the South, they had went through their own versions of Jim Crow when there was quote unquote separate water fountains. And so as civil rights take place and these Jim Crow things go away, and then their children now have an opportunity to go to better schools. And I say better schools not because they were white. I'm talking about better schools for they were going to schools where the stuff was a year behind or 2 years behind on the books they're reading. So we know that at that time the money wasn't equally distributed, and they play around with that now. Again, that's a whole other story. But I'm just saying the money wasn't equally distributed, and so in having their kids, in a sense, a chance to go to these other schools, and so for that generation, there was an excitement about our children have a chance to get an education from day one. We're talking about generations who quite often went to school for a little while and was in the fields by the time they was in middle school. So, my grandmother went to night school to get her high school education, for example, right? So we're talking about generations who couldn't even go through 12 years of public schools because of they had to be in labor, go out and start working at a very young age. So when their children got a chance to go to school for 12 years and not, the one room raggedy doing where you just learning your 4 R's or whatever they call it, whatever. So when they saw this, they saw it as an opportunity. So the generation just said, go forward. Don't worry about what we experienced for you now have this opportunity. So there became an information gap, in my opinion, where that generation was so to see their children to get these chances to go to college and these things that they never got. They were so excited about their children getting that they didn't sit down and say, they didn't tell my mom, my aunt, well, this is exactly what we went through for you to have this opportunity. They was just push them forward to say, go take advantage of, education is the future. Education is the future. Like it was and I'm not saying anything was wrong with the messaging, but they forgot to tell them about the Arkansas Nine. They forgot to tell them about specific instances in history. So when they got pushed in these schools and back to the whitewash history, they got pushed in the schools. They didn't tell them why they were able to be in that school. They got pushed into schools where my parents' generation didn't see themselves in the school. So you went from maybe a rundown school where you learned about yourself because we were in control of the curriculum naturally. So in those segregated schools, what was the history? It was your own history. But getting the opportunity to go to these other schools, that part was lost. And so now my parents' generation and down, we typically don't have a good sense of self because we went to integrated public schools that are not going to show you yourself. You're going to get his story, not our story. So I hope I've connected a lot here to say that's the context. So I think that created the gap between our generation and the older generation. And in my opinion, because the older generation failed to pass down, as I call it, the oil for our lamps to burn, is why there's always a disconnect. And now we're repeating it, even as the hip hop generation, we're repeating it as we watch these youth. And, we're saying that's not the way. You're tearing down this and you're tearing down that. Without realizing, as I've been saying over and over, we don't have real life examples of how we've changed things. They've still inherited a world where they're worried about police brutality just the same as our generation was and the generation before that. And so the youth are saying, why should we listen to you when you have no answers? So I'm with Dave Chappelle. They're doing just fine driving. And in their driving, because they're having a protest, I always bring this to the table, the stepchild of protest is chaos. There is no correct way to protest. If protesting means we had a means we could use, it doesn't seem to be successful, so now we're going to form some type of protest against the means that are available to us. So some protests are successful, some are not. Some chaos come, some don't. So when we see the chaos, we now dismiss the actual protest without watching the fact that these millennials are moving the needle. If you just tuned in, Kennedy Mitchell, big up to that young millennial who literally had Webster add some aspect of the systemic stuff to their definition, which it had never had. It only said racism was thinking one race was superior to another. That was the only definition. But as African Americans who understood the systemic stuff we were under, we knew racism ism, which is a ideology or system, has a power dynamic, and that definition was never represented. Kennedy Mitchell, age 22, millennial, challenged Webster. They responded and added 2 more definitions because of her. These youth ain't playing, man. As I said on the piece I wrote last night, they like Diddy. They ain't gonna stop. And so I think it would behoove us as the elder. I'm not old, but I'm just saying it would behoove us as the hip hop generation and the older generation to embrace meaning we're going to support and give you some wisdom to your energy and your ability to. These kids been protesting for 12, 13 days straight. Like, and if all you can judge is what are they accomplishing, we have Donald Trump sitting down and doing a police reform. Donald Trump doing police reform? We didn't make that happen. We didn't make that happen. And whether you think and I'll say the reform needs to go further. So it's not about me agreeing or like people got caught up into what's in the reform and what Trump really means, and I saw them saying like all the stuff because he did reform and gave the police nothing but props. So I'm not acting like that didn't happen, but let's be honest about the reason why he's having to do reform, because these youth won't stop. We got to give them their props. Period. We got to give them their props because we didn't make that happen. So we're judging what they're doing and not paying attention to the actions. Like I keep highlighting, these millennials are doing their damn thing. I reach out to them on the slide from side to from time to time, and I literally peep game on how they moving, man. They way more organized than we would ever think, and they ain't stopping. They ain't stopping. And the reality with protests is it's not about whether I'm supporting the protest or not. What it's about is understanding with protest, chaos may come. There will be missteps. This situation right now with the recent shooting in Atlanta is good. I think there were a couple of missteps. But highlighting that and taking a misstep and disavowing everything they're doing is some BS. That I will refuse to do. I wrote a poem years ago after the Mike Brown situation in which I entitled, and I use it all the time. I say, marching or burning, I salute you. And I'm gonna say this on this video just to tell you the distinction that I want to make when I wrote that poem. I wrote that poem. It was called Marching or Burning. In the Mike Brown situation, I'm gonna say something that's gonna probably not be great, received well in our culture. But I'm a legal studies major. People who know me very well know I love to research intensively. So I literally looked at all of the autopsy stuff after the Mike Brown situation, and I actually do not believe his hand was up. I think he was running at the dude. Still no reason for that Darren Wilson to pull the trigger. He should have waited for backup and just apprehended him. No reason to be shot. Let me make that clear. It still was murder. I just don't, based on the autopsy stuff, don't believe that his hands was up. I'm saying that to say this, but I still wrote a poem that said, marching or burning, I salute you. I'm trying to show you how, even though I don't think his hands were up per se, again, the kid still should be alive. Don't get it twisted. But even though the autopsy stuff proved to me, in my opinion, looking at it specifically, that his hands were not up, if you will, even though it proved that to me, I still distinguish how the youth responded in Ferguson after the fact. And I said, marching or burning, this is me, despite me believing his hands were not up, I still was in support of whether they marched peacefully or the things, broke out. And it's not support of I'm supporting a building being burning down. It's me understanding that we once again left them a world in which they still find it necessary to protest. If we didn't change it, how we gonna ridicule them to the degree that we tell them that's not the right way, while also not giving them an answer of what the way is. So I get the frustration. I get, as MLK say, riots are the voice of the unheard. I get it. That's whether I support it or not. That's just me understanding. And in us coming to them with understanding, then we might can bridge the gap on, okay, what's the next step? This is the last thing I'll say in reference to like the NBA right now having this divide on whether we should come back or not. I think it's a beautiful dialogue. I'm not going to say what side I'm on, but I'll say, I saw Stephen A. challenging Kyrie Irving on what's the next step. That's where we step in. Like some of the things that Stephen A. said could be the next step. You know what I mean? And so ridiculing keeps us divided. Understanding where the youth are coming from bridges the gap, and maybe we can add wisdom to what they're doing. So while they act what we may call enrage and out of frustration, and while we may understand it, if we want to give them the next step, we can't just ridicule them for what they're doing. Embrace and say we understand and bridge the gap and bring a solution. But if if the solution is gonna be what we've already done, they're gonna refuse that. So if you think you have a solution or you think there's a better way, don't ridicule before approaching. Embrace, understand, and say, "Hey, young lady, young man, how about let's add this to what y'all doing?" Because we got to give them credit that the things we're seeing right now. these actions, whether we want to act, because in our mind, we don't want to attach that these things we're watching happen. For example, I said this on another video, and I'm literally done on this one. We don't, we the police been going from administrative to arrested, from third degree to the second degree, like all these things. We don't want to give credit, but we didn't used to get that. We used to literally have to wait for trial just to see if it was going to be a grand jury. So all these steps, these youth are witnessing by not stopping protesting. So again, even if it's not directly related, even if there's a lot more behind why these things are happening, we didn't make it happen. Let's keep it real. Give the youth their props. Kennedy Mitchell, give her that 22-year-old her props. Got the definition of Webster changed. And then Aunt Jemima, again, if these companies are make on their own choosing to get rid of these these racist tropes, even if it's keep the bottom line, I ain't mad. Keep the pressure on them. That's where I'm at with it. I'm your boy, Montoya Smith, from the Mental Dialogue Talk Show. Check us out this Saturday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. We're about to discuss defunding the police. What does that really mean? So I'm still trying to track down if y'all know anybody who can advocate and understands defunding the police specifically. Please send them my way. I got a couple people I got to reach out to. If you know how we do our show, we bring people on both sides of it. So I really want to dialogue about what does defunding the police really mean this Saturday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So look right here on my page or right here on the Mental Dialogue Facebook page. Find the show, go to Blog Talk Radio, find the old shows, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm your boy, Montoya Smith. All I ask is that you think.